Call Seth Kantor, please.
Mr. Kantor, if you would, please come forward. Have you been sworn as a witness?
I have not, sir.
All right, if you would, please come forward and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in the proceedings before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please take a seat.
Kantor, just have a seat right there, please.
Mr. Kantor, would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury who you are?
My name is Seth Kantor. I live in Washington, D.C.
And what do you do?
I'm a newspaper reporter.
And what were you doing on the day the president was murdered?
I had accompanied the president from Washington, D.C. on the press plane to Texas. And in Dallas, I was in the motorcade as it came into Dealey Plaza.
Later, were you present when Lee Harvey Oswald, my client, was arrested and taken into custody?
I was at Parkland Hospital and went out to Love Field where the new president was sworn in, and then I rode downtown to the police station, and when I got there, they had arrested Lee Harvey Oswald.
Describe the scene at the Parkland Hospital in Dallas for the jury, please.
Well, I arrived at Parkland Hospital just very shortly after the president was brought in, and I saw the car that the president and his wife and the Connollys had been riding in. A door was open, there was blood on the ground, there was a bouquet of crushed roses in the back seat of the car.
You'd have wanted to plant bullet particles in there, could you have done so?
If I'd wanted to, yes.
Could anybody?
I believe so.
Did you later see somebody there that became noted or notorious in the saga of the assassination of our president?
Well, are you referring to Jack Ruby?
Yes.
Yes, I did not see Jack Ruby in that immediate area of the emergency room. I saw Jack Ruby and spoke with him and shook hands with him some distance away in the hospital as I was on my way to the press conference, an emergency press conference.
How did you happen to know Jack Ruby?
I had been a reporter in Dallas previous to moving to Washington. I was on the Dallas Times-Herald, frequently wrote feature stories, came across various characters in town, and Jack Ruby was one of those. And Jack Ruby was the kind of person who hung around newspaper city rooms and hung around with the police, and he was in full evidence, usually at sporting events, boxing matches, football games, things like that.
And he was there where the president was, where the president's body was?
He was in Parkland Hospital, yes, sir.
And it was in the Parkland Hospital, was it not, Mr. Kantor, in which the stretcher, both Conley and the president were left?
Yes, sir.
And it was on this stretcher, purportedly, of Governor Conley, that the magic bullet was found. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you believe that just assuming that had Jack Ruby wished to drop the magic bullet there, that he would have had an opportunity to do so?
I'm sorry, I can't say. I just don't know.
I don't know. He was in the hospital.
Yes, he was definitely in the hospital.
Thank you. Were you around when Jack Ruby shot my client?
Yes, I was.
Do we have the clip of the killing of Lee? I'd like the jury to see that, please.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters.
Now, did you make some inquiry into the background of Jack Ruby?
I hadn't intended to make inquiry into his background in the years that I lived in Dallas, but I knew something about his background then, and then eventually I made a concerted effort to look into it.
And was that in connection with the writing of a book that you did?
It was.
Did you get some information by suing the United States government under the Freedom of Information Act in order to write your book, sir?
Yes, I did.
And as what was part of the information that you got as a result of that lawsuit, the telephone records of Jack Ruby?
Yes.
Could you give me 254, please? Now, this is a chart, sir, as you know. Would you explain it to the jury? Would you just step down here very quickly and explain it to the jury?
Well, this is a chart showing Jack Ruby's toll calls from both his home and his place of business, a striptease club in downtown Dallas, to various people. In particular, it shows during the months of September through November an upsurge in Jack Ruby's phone calls.
And did you find out to who those calls were made?
Well, they included calls to people like Barney Baker, who was a lieutenant of Jimmy Hoffa, and he weighed about 300 pounds, and he had a reputation for being quite a muscle man.
How about Nafio Pecora?
Nafio Pecora, also a member of the Underworld, was included, and so was David Yaris. And
Mr. Kantor?
You can sit down
We're through
again.
with the
Thank you.
exhibit. Thank you.
I'll have to see it. Let me see.
Yes, right here. Number 22.
It's not. It's Pecora, Lieutenant Forecast.
Yeah,
not
that's right.
Pecora.
Yeah. And how about Louis McWillie?
Louis McWillie, he called in Las Vegas and was a well-known police character in Dallas.
How about Lenny Patrick?
Lenny Patrick, a Chicago hoodlum like David Yaris. Also.
And do you know whether or not Lenny Patrick wasn't a mafia executioner?
Yes, that was his reputation.
Well, all right. Do you know whether or not Mr. Ruby went to Cuba prior to the assassination of President Kennedy?
Jack Ruby made known trips to Cuba in the fall of 1959.
And do you know who he saw there?
According to information furnished by the CIA, ultimately, I went to a jail cell to visit a well-known mafia leader in the United States named Santo Trafficante.
Was Santos Trafficante known as one involved in organizing the assassination squads with the CIA?
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
The CIA had made a number of attempts on the life of Castro, had it not?
That's correct.
Now, were you present when Mr. Oswald was brought out, was hauled through at the press conference and made some statements about wanting help?
I was.
Would you produce that clip, please, for us at this time?
Question by Judge, however, I protested at that time that I was not allowed legal representation during that very short and sweet hearing. I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody has told me anything except that I'm accused of murdering a policeman. I know nothing more than that, and I do request someone to come forward to give me a legal assistance.
Now, were you present when Lee told the world as he was being hauled down the hall that he was a patsy?
I was.
May we have the clip of that, please?
Not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about. Back up, man. President. President. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I live in the village. I'm just a patsy.
Thank you. As a result of your investigation, did you discover whether or not Jack Ruby had in fact been an informant for the FBI?
Yes, he had been.
And how do you know that, sir?
I obtained FBI records.
And how did you obtain those records?
through the Freedom of Information Act, federal.
What did those records reveal in that regard?
That Jack Ruby had been what the FBI called a PCI, a potential criminal informer, signed up with the FBI in the fall of 1959.
Are you acquainted with the request of Mr. Ruby to be taken away from Dallas and to be taken instead to Washington so that he could testify?
He asked several times, yes, sir.
You know, several. As a matter of fact, how many times?
7 times.
7 separate times to be taken to Washington?
During the course of his interview with the Chief Justice.
May we have, there was a public interview at the time of the trial, was there not?
Yes, there was.
May we have the clip of that, please?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives. In other words, I'm the only person in the background that knows the truth pertaining to everything relating to my circumstances.
Do you think it'll ever come out?
No, because unfortunately, the people that had so much to gain and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come of their voice to the world.
Now, these people are in very high positions, Jack?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kantor, you may examine.
Mr. Kantor, Jack Ruby was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for his killing of Oswald. Is that correct?
That is correct,
He
sir.
died on January the 3rd, 1967 from natural causes while in custody?
That's correct.
You agree, do you not, that there's absolutely no evidence that Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald knew each other?
I agree to that, sir.
And when you saw Ruby at Parkland Hospital, you felt it was perfectly normal, though, to see him there because he was, as you described, a goer to events and a man about town.
Yes, sir.
You're also aware, are you not, that at Ruby's trial there was medical testimony that his electroencephalograms to measure the electric activity of the brain showed that he had organic brain damage?
Yes, I remember that.
And that this brain damage was probably traceable to psychomotor epilepsy?
I do remember
So you
that.
would agree, would you not, that Mr. Ruby was mentally and emotionally, he was not a well man?
He might not fall within the pattern of the norm.
Okay. Mr. Kantor, you will agree, and you've so said, that the evidence is clear that Jack Ruby had a very deep affection for President Kennedy. There's all types of evidence of that.
Yes, sir.
And at the hospital where you saw Jack Ruby at Parkland Hospital, he had tears in his eyes. Is that correct?
Yes, he was obviously under emotional strain. Yes, sir.
And that he later said that he even felt worse than when his mother and father died?
He did. Yes, sir.
He also had a bizarre relationship with his dogs, did he not?
I would say so.
Well,
Yes, sir.
he had as many as 10 dogs, one of Sheba, one of whom he called Sheba, and Sheba was his wife, and the other 9 were his children. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And he'd take them, particularly Sheba, wherever he went. Is that correct?
Yes, she traveled with him constantly. Yes.
In fact, Sheba waited patiently for him in his car while he went inside the police station and shot Oswald. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Kantor, you agree, do you not, that the general consensus of those like yourself who have studied Ruby is that Ruby thought he would be a hero to the world for having killed Oswald, a presidential assassin. Is that not true?
I'm certain of it. Yes, sir.
Okay. You've testified to phone calls that Ruby made to crime figures and some meetings he had with various crime figures. Is that correct?
I did.
But Ruby had been associated with these crime figures for many years.
Yes, he had been.
Okay. And he had regular contact with them throughout the years. Is that not true?
No, that's not entirely true. Some of those calls that he made and some of the visits he received from some of those same people shortly before the assassination were with people who he'd been out of contact with for quite some time.
Okay. Now, you're aware that the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated these same phone calls that you testified to and concluded, quote, testimony to the committee supported the conclusion that Ruby's phone calls were, by and large, related to his labor troubles. Is that correct?
Well, I don't, I can't out and out dispute it. It's just that these people who he was telephoning were well and deeply connected with the underworld.
Mr. Kantor, are you implying to this jury that by Ruby's saying that he had something to say and wanted to go to Washington, that he was referring to a conspiracy? Are you implying that to the jury?
I hope that I'm implying, members of the jury, that Jack Ruby was maintaining that he had more information to reveal, yes.
Okay. Now, I ask you this. How could you possibly say that, Mr. Kantor, when in the same identical testimony of Mr. Ruby before the Warren Commission, he specifically and expressly said that no one else was involved with him? So we know, Mr. Kantor, that when Jack Ruby was talking to the Chief Justice about going to Washington, he had to have been talking about something other than a conspiracy.
I don't agree with that, sir. For one thing, one of his early attorneys, a man named Joe Tannehill from Jasper, Texas, told me that he was positive, and Mr. Tannehill was present during that interview with the Chief Justice, that Mr. Tannehill was positive that the room was bugged,
Okay.
that Ruby's words were being carried elsewhere, and that it was not a safe place for Ruby to be so far.
He didn't know that, but he suspected the room was bugged. All right.
Well,
That's why he wanted to go to Washington.
Okay.
that's correct.
Did he ever testify or tell anyone why he wanted to go to Washington?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. You're also aware that on the morning he shot and killed Oswald, Sunday, November the 24th, 1963, Ruby got a phone call at his apartment from one of his strippers asking him to wire her some money. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you believe this actually took place. Is that correct?
I do believe it.
And the evidence does show that Ruby left his apartment, went down to the Western Union office, and sent a money order to this girl at 11:17 that morning. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Ruby murdered Oswald at 11:21. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Ruby has always maintained that the actual decision to do it was a spur-of-the-moment thing when he went to the police department after he had sent the money order at the Western Union office. You're aware of that?
That's what he said, yes, sir.
After sending the money order at 11:17, how long do you estimate it would have taken Ruby to walk to the police department and get down to the basement where he killed Oswald at 11:21?
Less than 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, sir.
Rick?
Well, you believe there was a Ruby cover-up from your investigation?
Oh, I certainly do, yes, sir.
Would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury why?
I believe that a lot of evidence points to the fact that Jack Ruby was led into the police station on purpose that Sunday morning with the express purpose of killing Lee Harvey Oswald.
Why do you believe that?
Well, I believe for one of two reasons. Either he was being used by a force that he wasn't even aware of, or there was a small number of Dallas police officers who felt very strongly about the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald had killed one of their own number, and they wanted revenge. And they would not be able to obtain revenge once Lee Harvey Oswald was transferred to jurisdiction of the Dallas County.
That's your theory of the matter.
That's correct.
At least it's your theory that somebody, unknown to you or anybody else, made arrangements for him to get in.
It took me a lot longer to get in than it took Jack Ruby that morning, that Sunday morning. And he was on the scene regularly throughout the weekend, coming into and leaving the police department at will.
Thank you, Mr. Kantor. You may step down.
Thank you.
Defense rests.
Defense rests.